You don't. Do you think my son would be that stupid that he would bring my diary all the way back here? You didn't, did you? You didn't bring it, did you?
Well,
You did.
look, can we discuss this later?
I should have mailed it to the Marx brothers. Will you take it easy? Take it easy? Why do you think I sent it home in the first place? So it wouldn't fall into their hands. I came here to save you. Oh, yeah? And who's gonna come to save you, Junior? I told you.
Don't call me Junior.
We'll see what happens when you pick a good movie.
Well, I didn't pick this one, you did, so...
I know, I'm trying to teach you things. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Podcast Part 3, the Part 3 podcast. I am Sam.
And I'm Will.
And we are here today. Like, I definitely came in kind of hot with The Dark Knight Rises. I think I was in a mood, world events or what have you. I was not the receptive audience for that movie at that particular moment. That's why this one was this was a breeze. This was as you said, Will, this was like a warm hug. We watched Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
So nice. Just sort of, it's like seeing old friends again.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not a perfect movie by any means, but it's just an absolute joy to watch. And I think that's not just nostalgia talking. I think this is just like a really, really well-made blockbuster. You watch this and you're like, oh, shit, this is just everyone involved at the top of their game, pretty much.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's, unlike a lot of the Part 3s that we've done, particularly the blockbusters, like this one, everyone feels like they are not, no one's phoning it in. Everyone is like, they're working hard. They're going for it. There's a commitment to the bit. It's just like, everyone's there. No one's tired. Everyone's just ready to rock.
And that's, I think part of that is this was the last one they made, at least for a long time. But it's a pretty spaced out franchise, certainly by franchise standards. You've got Raiders in 81, Temple of Doom in 84, and then this one's 5 years later. This is 89.
Yeah, and also it sort of helps that there's no real continuity that they're beholden to. Like,
no.
With Temple of Doom being a prequel of sorts, and, it's like these are really meant to feel like the serials of old, where it's just like, this is one mini adventure in the life of Indiana Jones, and it connects sort of to the others in ways, but nothing like concrete, and no one cares.
No. and there's nothing about Temple of Doom that makes it a prequel besides that year at the beginning of the movie.
Right, exactly.
That I think Spielberg said he made it a prequel because he specifically didn't want to deal with the Nazis or address like why characters from the first one don't come back, like Marion or Sala, and which is, showing a level of like filling in the blanks or wanting to explain yourself that is just the only thing that happens with sequels now. Like, that's just when J.K. Rowling isn't tweeting about how she's scared of trans people, she's tweeting like filling in plot holes and like bad faith plot holes in Harry Potter now. And that's like, I feel like no one, when Temple of Doom and probably when Last Crusade came out, I'm sure there were fans that asked these questions, but that wasn't like world building and franchise building and an expanded universe were decades away from being a thing.
Right. No, there's no aspect of it that's just, we're going to do franchise management and there is, I guess, there's the prologue, which is sort of the dry run for the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, but that's really about it.
That's the story of how Indiana Jones had all the defining aspects of his persona happen in about 20 minutes one afternoon in 1912. For those of you that aren't familiar with Indiana Jones...
all four of you.
I mean, if you've never seen the movies, if you haven't... Like, everyone knows who Indiana Jones is through cultural osmosis. He is the most iconic film character. I'd say there's maybe, 2 or 3 more famous film characters than Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I'd probably say like Godzilla and James Bond, I think, are the only other two.
Probably, and at least one of those isn't original to film, if nothing else.
Right. Yeah.
So Raiders of the Lost Ark is the first movie, and it was a collaboration between Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, who were both in 1982 coming off of, in both their cases, like some of the biggest successes of their career. Like Spielberg had done, leading up to 1981, he had done, he'd done Duel and Sugarland Express, and then he'd done Jaws, which might still be his best movie, in my opinion. He'd done, and that's not a knock on his other movies. He'd done Jaws, he'd done Close Encounters, he'd had like a bit of a whiff with 1941, and he came into Raiders, and he and Lucas came up with this idea to sort of do the action equivalent to Star Wars. Like Star Wars was the modernized version of Buck Rogers' sci-fi serials of the early 20th century. This was going to be the adventure version of that. The sort of classic treasure hunter in a fedora and a leather jacket. They sort of a throwback to older movie stars like John Wayne or Steve McQueen, and they couldn't have cast it better. It is flawlessly paced. The action is fantastic. The music is iconic. It was a huge hit. It was nominated for Best Picture, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty close to a perfect movie. I don't know what more there is to say about Raiders except how awesome it is.
There's nothing to say about Raiders. It's a fantastic movie. I love it. It's one that I can watch over and over and over again and enjoy, and that's not like a hot take by any means. It's a iconic, beloved film that you and I both grew up with. Yeah, I think I first saw it. I think I had it taped off of the UPN 38 Movie Loft. Which was, I wore that VHS down to a pulp, pretty much, watching it over and over again. And so he does Raiders. He keeps going. He does E.T. in 82, Spielberg. He does his segment of the Twilight Zone movie. The less said about most of the Twilight Zone movie, the better. Except for George Miller's segment. Everything else is kind of either schmaltzy and weird or horribly tainted by the stories behind it.
Joe Dante's segment is pretty cool.
Yeah, the Billy Mooney Into the Cornfield, but done with monster rabbit puppets. All right, Joe Dante and George Miller's halves, good. Spielberg and Landis's halves, bad. We'll just leave it at that. And so after that, he does Indiana Jones sequel. He does Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And I think this is important that people forget. The first movie is just Raiders of the Lost Ark. The second movie is Indiana Jones the Temple of the Doom. Because I think they realized right out of the gate, we happen to create an iconic character. In the vein of James Bond. And James Bond by the mid-'80s had the benefit of probably, 10, 15 movies already. Indiana Jones became as iconic with one movie. And Temple of Doom, I don't remember if it was a big hit or not. It was certainly a hit, but it was definitely, it's always been like the oddball one in the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, we could look it up, I guess, but it must have been a big enough hit that. But but everyone was it has a much darker tone. It feels a lot more serious and a lot more dour, and it's a little more depressing. It's a lot more violent, and it is one of the movies credited as creating the PG-13 rating. It's just there's a lot kind of.
It's got the Scream 3 thing of it has much darker subject matter, but its attempts at comedy don't work as well.
Are much broader, yeah.
It's definitely if you have to point to Indiana Jones as like the white savior trope, that's the movie you can point to more than any of them.
Yeah.
But that being said, it has some really cool stuff in it. The last 45 minutes of that movie are just nonstop action, from the fight on the conveyor belt to the minecart chase to the bridge sequence. When it's good, it's great, and when it's not good, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get through a lot of like guys in bronzer eating monkey brains to get to the action.
To get to the good stuff. Yeah, it's the one I've seen the least of the three. Because I guess I saw, because Last Crusade was the first one I saw. and then I saw Raiders a lot because it was on TV all the time. And then I didn't see Temple of Doom until like high school.
Yeah, I think that might be the case with me too, because it was always like the scary one. You know,
Yeah.
it's got the they eat snakes and they rip out a
Pull out
guy's
heart. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is the darkest one, but I mean, there's people get their heads melted in all these movies, so
True.
But I definitely saw Temple way later, and Last Crusade I've seen way more. And Last Crusade comes out about 5 years later in 1989. It's also the first one that came out in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I definitely remember it, like, vaguely it coming out. Like, it came out, you know, the summer of 89. My mom was pregnant with my sister, you know, so it was like, that was like the first time I think I became aware of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, and I remember, I mean, I was like 4 or 5 when it came out, but I do remember going to the movie theater with my parents and seeing the poster, or like a standee or something like that. I do remember that, and then I remember going to the video store and seeing the poster for that when it came out, which is when I saw it when it hit video.
And then, like, it's definitely coming to the end of Spielberg being interested in making that kind of movie, because leading up to Last Crusade, he did The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun and Always. He was doing more dramas. He was doing more prestige movies. And after this, you got Hook, you got Jurassic Park, and then he does Schindler's List, and he's not interested in making blockbusters anymore. He keeps making them, but he's not interested in them anymore.
Well, I mean that the blockbusters that he made in the early aughts. I mean, which I guess the science fiction trilogy, so to speak, that he made of AI, Minority Report, and War of the Worlds. Those are movies he actually, I think, like, really did want to make.
Yeah,
he feels like he's invested in them.
AI is an interesting movie because he's picking up where another filmmaker left off. I think Minority Report is great. War of the Worlds is another one where it's got some good moments and it's got some really boring stuff in it. But they're also way less fun movies. I don't
right.
Yeah, they're the Janusz Kaminski era where everything is blue, gray, and lens flary. You know, it's
and very depressing too. They're not as like fun. It's like he's like grappling with like his mortality and his like ability to be a father, and like,
he's no longer like a son reflecting on his father. He's a father reflecting on his own fatherhood. It's you know, he grew up. Guess what? Filmmakers evolve, and you know, he's made a lot of great movies in there too. I can watch Catch Me If You Can anytime. That's a fantastic movie, but you know, he definitely. And here's the thing, you can't just keep trying to recapture the success of your 80s heyday, which people have been trying to do nonstop now for almost 20 years, is trying to rebottle the lightning that was like blockbusters from 82 or 84 or 89. And you can't do it. And that's what makes these movies so special, is because they're the real thing. It's the difference between holding like a replica of a painting and holding the real thing. You know, it's and Last Crusade, it's just, it feels, I won't say it feels dated, but it's so nice to watch in a way that movies today aren't, just visually, because it's like it's everyone's got their feet on the ground and it's real, and you don't have to suspend your disbelief too much. There's weight and texture to everything,
and you can see everything. Like, it, you know, so much of like movies nowadays just feel like sort of gray, like mush, and like watching this movie now, it's everything sort of bright and colorful, and like there's no moments where you're like, what am I looking at?
No, and I honestly think for all of his fame as a blockbuster filmmaker, Spielberg doesn't get credit for how meticulously he crafts action sequences. And the Indiana Jones movies are like the high watermark of that. There's 2 or 3 chase sequences in this movie, and I think the big one is the tank fight, the tank chase. And it's like, I think he boarded that out and like knew every shot and every beat of that sequence from beginning to end before they ever rolled camera. And it shows. It shows,
yeah.
Yeah, like he's definitely a perfectionist. He doesn't have that reputation of being like a Kubrick or James Cameron like do 40 takes perfectionist, but you're never gonna see a sloppy sequence from Steven Spielberg.
No, never. And even in the movies where he, kind of is phoning it in, it always seems like he cares enough to make it look really good.
It's the ones where it's missing that spark. I think it's just because he's technically gifted, but he's not as invested in the project.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I think you can look at Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the last, Indiana Jones movie, to that. I think there are some great sequences in it, but it's clear like his heart's just not in making another one of those.
No. I think we'll talk about this probably when we get to Jurassic Park 3, like the difference between Jurassic Park and The Lost World. Like apparently when he was making The Lost World, some of the time he was literally phoning in direction from the set of Amistad. In the 90s, he was definitely transitioning to becoming a different kind of filmmaker, but maybe not fully ready to let go of the kind of movies he made in the 70s and 80s. This is kind of the last of that era of the like peak Spielberg, the iconic Spielberg movies, right before Jurassic Park, also before computer effects took over that kind of filmmaking for him.
Right. Yeah, well, and I think it's very clear that he loves crafting set pieces. Like, that's, like, something he just, like, it makes him really excited and, like, is something that is fun to do. So I think there is a part of him where he just doesn't sort of, like you say, he didn't want to let go of that. And he's like, I love making these, like, these set pieces. So even in, like, if the story and the emotional aspect of a movie, it doesn't kind of get his motor running, the meticulously crafting the set pieces did, or enough to make the movie anyway.
Absolutely. Like, I think there's always some aspect of a movie that clearly gets him excited, otherwise he wouldn't bother making it. He's had plenty of movies in development over the years that didn't come to fruition, and he basically can make whatever he wants. So it's like, I'm never gonna he's never gonna be a work for hire director.
No,
he's one of those directors that was fortunate enough to hit the ground running so quickly at the beginning of his career that and have success on a project no one believed in Jaws, that he's basically been able to write his own ticket ever since.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think when he feels like he has something to prove, it's something to prove as a creative director, not just as like a moneymaker.
I mean, and that's what Raiders feels like. I mean, that feels like that is done by a director who is just like, I think Drew McWeeny has written about this a lot, about Raiders, that it's just by a director who's just hungry to like prove himself, and like just that movie is just like a muscle car in the way that it's built and constructed.
Oh yeah, it's so good. I mean, it's And he created a character, and I think it's out there, the transcript of him and Lucas hanging out. I think they're hanging out at some hotel on the west side of LA, talking about and first brainstorming the character of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Everything that needed to go right for that character to work happened. There's another universe, some Loki variant universe, where Tom Selleck is Indiana Jones.
Yep.
And it wouldn't have worked.
And it was probably only Raiders of the Lost Ark. They probably didn't make sequels in that universe. Not that Tom Selleck wouldn't have been good in the part or anything, but it just wouldn't have been the lightning in the bottle that is Raiders would not have been there.
Yeah, and well, I hate describing Indiana Jones this way, but there's a bit of an edginess to him, and there's a bit of a dark side to him, and I think Harrison Ford brings that. You definitely see that in Temple of Doom. You see that a bit in Last Crusade even, and I'd say Last Crusade is, of the original three movies, the broadest of them in terms of comedy, and it's and like the way this is the closest Indiana Jones gets to being played by Chris Pratt of any of the original movies. He falls down a lot.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's true. And I think overall, it just feels like it is Raiders, but with the edges kind of sanded down and made sort of more family friendly. And friendly's wrong because that makes it sound like it's kind of a RoboCop 3 thing, which it's not. but it just feels like all the stuff that like the jagged parts and the darker parts of Raiders and Indiana Jones specifically is kind of gone in this.
We talked about this with Dark Knight Rises, how it feels more like a sequel to Batman Begins than it does The Dark Knight. And I'd say this feels more like a sequel to Raiders than it does to Temple of Doom. I think that's part of the reason a lot of people see Temple of Doom last, because if you like Raiders, this is the one that's going to give you more of that.
Yeah.
You know, you like him shooting Nazis. You like him, out in the desert. Do you like Sala? Do you like Marcus Brody? This is all of that is back. It's pretty much the same, like, kind of structure as Raiders, too.
Yeah.
And
yeah, aside from that prologue, which is a weird choice, I think, in like, because it's like a double prologue, because you see young Indiana Jones, how he gets his whip and hat and scar and fear of snakes, and then you see older Indiana Jones on an adventure with the same thing that he was dealing with as a kid. It's such an odd choice. It's like an opening to the movie.
I mean, I guess it's to show that, like, yeah, all right, so the big runner of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is the relationship between Indy and his father, played by Sean Connery, which you couldn't have cast that more brilliantly.
No.
His dad is James Bond. But when we first see them in the movie in their present day, I think it's 1938, give or take, in this.
Yeah.
They haven't talked in 20 years, and they're estranged. His dad is a medieval literature professor, and he was, into Grail lore, and clearly growing up, he traveled all over the place researching stuff, and it led to sort of his Indiana Jones' mother died at some point. It led to a wedge between them. And right. Indiana Jones, one day in Utah in 1912, grabbed the Cross of Coronado because it belongs in a museum, and ran afoul of a man credited in the credits as Fedora, who was basically Indiana Jones, who kind of like sees something in this kid and says like, you lost today, kid, but it doesn't mean you have to like it, and gives him his hat. And that same day, Indiana Jones learned how to use a bullwhip, and he learned he hates snakes, and he gets a scar on his chin. And it's silly on one level, but at the same time, I think it's trying to do a shorthand of Indiana Jones, because he didn't have that connection with his dad, became kind of a different person and headed in a different direction.
Okay.
And became
I guess I can
like
see that.
The reckless ne'er-do-well adventurer. As his father says, Indiana Jones left just as he was becoming interesting.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. Yeah.
And it's the two of them that kind of their respective obsessions with treasure hunting led to a division between them, and then at the end of the movie, let it go. They let it go.
Let it go.
Saving each other is more important than the Holy Grail.
Yeah. And I do like that this the MacGuffin here has more emotional weight than the others in the other movies. I like that there's like Indy trying to find the Holy Grail is something that his dad has been trying to do, and it's like him trying to connect with his dad, and that his dad has this obsession for his whole life, and I like that element a lot. I think it adds a nice dimension to it. To the story that the others just kind of don't have, because the MacGuffins in those are just very much MacGuffins, just something to keep sort of an engine of the plot going.
Yeah, there's some stakes to the first two movies of like, you can't let the bad guys get this thing because
I mean, because it's bad and it will destroy everyone, or Hitler will take over the world. I mean, and I get that, but it's nice to have sort of the added emotional stuff to it too.
It also adds an element of, it gives Indiana Jones more purpose in the story, because if there's one flaw to Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's that if you take Indiana Jones out of that plot, nothing changes. The Nazis open the Ark, the Ark defends itself, end of story. If anything, if Indiana Jones hadn't been there, they would have taken the Ark to Berlin, and it would have melted Hitler too. They open up a Jewish relic, and that relic gets one look at who's got it and is like, fuck no, and just melts them all. In this one, he's not looking for the Grail at first, he's looking for his father. you know, but you know that those two things are gonna converge at some point.
Yeah. No, I mean, but it's just, yeah, you're right. I mean, if and the other two, I don't remember Temple of Doom all that well, but it did seem like if he took a nap, he might not. Nothing probably would have mattered all that.
Well, presumably at some point the Shankara stones would have had enough of Molaram and burned him up, but you know, he's got to look. The white man's got to go save all those little Indian
little
kids,
children,
you know,
all the mining children.
But yeah, this is like, and this, I think, coming back to it, this definitely feels like a response to Temple of Doom in that they're gonna go back to basics and kind of play it a little bit safe.
Yeah,
there's some of the dark side of Indiana Jones in this. Like at one point, he's very close to just choking Dr. Schneider out.
Right.
You know, he's it's not like he stopped killing people. It's not like RoboCop.
Right.
all the characters are a little broader, and you see that a little bit with Indy, and you see that a little bit with the villains, like the Nazi colonel, and you see that with Marcus Brody, and you see that with Sala. Like, because those two especially feel like they feel completely. Marcus Brody becomes C-3PO in this movie.
Yeah.
And it's like in the first Indiana Jones, if you go back and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, Marcus Brody seems like, he's just like, he was like Indiana Jones at one point, and he's just gotten a little older and retired. You know, like he says, like a few years ago, I'd have gone after the Ark myself. And Sala seems like just one of like, Indy's got like buddies in every town, and Sala's this cool, competent, you know, digger and buddy to Indiana Jones. And then in this, he's, he feels a little, I don't know, he's regressed perhaps a little bit in terms of competence.
Yeah, they both seem to have wandered out of a different movie. Like they're both like in this slapstick comedy that I don't know. It's like it feels of a piece with the rest of the movie, but it also feels kind of off in a way.
Yeah, it's you don't need it. You could make them. You either don't need to have them in the movie,
right? But
you want to have them in there because we're bringing the gang back, you know.
Yeah.
But you could make them more competent. What I wanted to see, especially this time around, the characters that are really interesting that don't pay off are the Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword.
Right.
Like you really build up Kazim as like if he's the guy from The Mummy, basically.
Yeah.
So you kind of want him to team up with them. Like for the final thing, and then they all just kind of get killed. They take on the Nazis and get wiped out. Yeah. And they don't really pay off in the way you would want.
No, and that was actually something I had completely forgotten about them until this rewatch, and I was like, oh yeah, this is something the Mummy cribbed from the Indiana Jones series liberally, but actually cribbed from this and did it better.
And there's characters like this in like James Bond movies. Like I think Timothy Dalton teamed up with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan at one point, and I think Art Malik plays a character kind of like Kazim. You kind of wanted more of that. You wanted like one new cool character. Like in every movie, Indiana Jones should get a good ally, and in this, like he doesn't have a short round. He doesn't have like the guy at the beginning of Temple of Doom, Wuhan. You know, like you want that world to build out a little bit, and you don't really get that in this, and you don't get that in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull either. But you know,
that's a conversation for another day, I guess.
It's not a good movie, and we don't like it. There, I'm done. If you've ever seen Indiana Jones and thought, man, I wish there was one of these that had like big prequel energy, big Star Wars prequel energy, where everything looks like a cartoon and everything feels a little off, and Harrison Ford looks bored. There you go.
And old. And very old.
Very old. That's the one. I think that's one of the first of the nostalgia era, bringing back your classic characters, but now they're like sad and miserable, and their lives are falling apart. And that one, he's been accused of being a communist. And all his friends are dead, and he's lost his job, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Oh God, yeah. What a weird movie. That's a weird movie.
Well, that's one. We all went into that one like we did with the prequels, like where we wanted it to be good. We wanted this to be so good. We were like, yeah, Lucas is writing the story, but Spielberg won't let anything happen. no. Right out of the gate, as soon as that gopher comes out of the hole, that
You're
CGI
like,
gopher, you're
we're
like,
done.
oh,
We're done.
no.
Here we go.
Oh, dear.
I feel like it's a real mistake for this type of thing to steer away from supernatural artifacts and things. I think doing aliens, unless you're going like a Lovecraftian route, doing like the 1950s aliens just feels very strange in the Indiana Jones world. And I can't put my finger on it because there's nothing inherently like wrong with having aliens, but they just, the way they're presented in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as these like 1950s aliens, it just feels so out of place.
Yeah, like they went through so many different scripts.
I know.
Leading up to that, like and other artifacts and other takes on flying saucers. And I think what it is like literally every Indiana Jones movie, at least in the original trilogy, is an artifact from a specific religion. You have Judaism with the Ark of the Covenant. You have Hinduism with the Shankara stones, and then you have Christianity with the Holy Grail, the Holy fucking Grail, which is kind of hard to top in terms of artifacts.
Yeah.
And so if you want to do Incan or Mayan or Aztec, South American cultures and their religion, I think there's a way to do it and tie it into aliens, but I think you got to use a lighter touch and be more vague about it. And there's no ambiguity to, like... All of these movies basically say, oh yeah, these religious artifacts are real, and, you know, these gods are real. Right. That doesn't jibe with space aliens are real. This isn't the Marvel universe where Thor's like a dude. No, I think it could have been done, but it needed to be like much more ambiguous and stay on the sort of fantasy treasure hunting track, and not focus so much on, you know, the alien skull telepathy thing. It needed to maybe be a different artifact than a crystal skull, or I don't know. Like, look, that movie's got a lot of problems, but I don't think that the alien thing is like in total is the thing that kills it. I think it's more in the execution.
Oh, no. No. I mean, I think there's no. It's like that's a whole bunch of dominoes that sort of hit along the way that compound into a bigger issue with it.
Yeah, my biggest problem with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it should just be Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull.
Yeah, what's this kingdom nonsense?
Why did you? It's so much hat on a hat. No, my biggest issue with it is kind of a weird, like, aesthetic nitpicky one, and I think I've talked to you about this before. Is I really hate the cinematography in that movie. Everything is like, the colors are all too bright, and part of it is they didn't film on locations, or the locations they used they expanded with CG, but everything just is like a little too bright and a little too clean. And I realized in hindsight after I saw the movie, oh, it's Janusz Kaminski that was the cinematographer, and Kaminski is inarguably a brilliant cinematographer, but that's not his color palette. He makes Minority Report. He makes Saving Private Ryan. He makes, he makes blue and gray, very cold, very, sort of almost documentary style films. He's not Douglas Slocum. And Douglas, I watching this now, I think this might have been the first time I watched Last Crusade on Blu-ray. And my God, that is a gorgeous movie. Like, it's really... Indiana Jones has the benefit of, like, Star Wars, where they just kept cleaning the print every few years to, put it out on home video. But it is... You really... Like, the lighting... Some of the lighting effects in this movie are just brilliant. It's and Douglas Slocum wasn't necessarily, like... He's not, like, a super renowned cinematographer. He did all the, like, Ealing comedies with Alec Guinness, like Kind Hearts and Coronets. He did... Ken Russell's Jesus Christ Superstar. Last Crusade was actually his last movie, because he went blind in one of his eyes. He lived to be 103 though, so good for him. But really, just a gorgeous movie.
Yeah, no, it looks great, and I mean, and not to make this the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull podcast, but I think the problem with Crystal Skull is that the Kaminsky's trying to ape Douglas Slocum, and when cinematographers try
Exactly.
to ape other cinematographers, it just doesn't. It
No.
always feels weird.
Especially when you could not be different as in visually from that cinematographer as those two guys are. It also shows the difference between, like, Slocum shot all three of the original movies, but it's also the difference between Last Crusade is like you can really see how beautiful it is when you can shoot on location and use natural light, versus Temple of Doom is a lot of sets and it's a lot of matte paintings. It's the difference between beautiful natural backgrounds and, beautiful matte paintings, but they're still matte paintings. And I think that's one of the things about Temple of Doom is it's just visually such a different movie than the other two.
And the color palette's very different too.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know that they're in like a different location and it would look different anyway, but it just feels like this outlier.
Yeah. The opening credits are different. It's different font from the other movies.
Yeah.
It's a different it's a much more effects heavy movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, Indy kind of stumbles onto the adventure. He's not sort of like brought into it like in Raiders, where the government sends him on this thing, and then in this one, in Last Crusade, he's hired to do something. He's like on the run from one other thing in Temple of Doom, and he just ends up in
It's they all three movies start with that the James Bond opening,
an unrelated adventure. Yeah,
which I think is great. Like, you know what this trilogy is like? You know what other trilogy it's like? The Mario games, the original 3 Mario games.
You know what? Yeah.
Original Mario, iconic. Mario 2, good but different. Everything's a little different. It's like all the mechanics are a different game.
Right.
And then Mario 3 is like Mario 1, but like a little bigger and a little more colorful and
and sillier, and it's like we're going back to basics, but with a bigger palette. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, this movie's not perfect. Also, I'd say this is probably the one. Again, I'm not when I'm talking about these movies, I'm not talking about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't count Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's so removed from. It's 19 years later, I think. Yeah, 2008.
19 years.
It's so far removed, and I mean, there's another one coming out, and that's still a shorter span of time, but. But like when I say I'm almost always just talking about the original trilogy of movies.
Right.
This one definitely has the weakest villains too.
Yeah, they're not as fun.
They're not as memorable. They're
not as memorable, and Dr. Schneider is like, they try to humanize her in a way that that did not really work for me. At least this watch.
Yeah.
Giving her like some sort of shades. I appreciated them trying, but like she's such a non-entity, Although I did think it was funny that both Sean Connery and Harrison Ford slept with her. I thought that was sort of
she
a
talks in
funny
her sleep.
dynamic.
I didn't trust her. Why did you? I mean, yeah. I mean, of course they did.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's so funny. You're like, obviously they did.
I'm assuming as the next man. I was the next man. But yeah, like Donovan, he's just like, as the main villain, he doesn't quite, like Molaram is like a larger than life villain, but he's definitely scary and he's definitely effective, and Amish Puri does a really good job playing him. Like, he plays him real straight. And Belloc is kind of like Belloc, and the three villains in the original, like, there's Belloc, and there's, I think his name's Tote. The little Peter Lorre guy, and then there's like a Nazi officer who's kind of the straight. He's like the Führer is not a patient man. But he's very measured compared to Belloc, who is the shadowy reflection of Indiana Jones. And then you have your little Gestapo thug. And in this one, the Nazi officer's really broad, and Dr. Schneider she's not like a villain. Like, her motivations are never clear. And then Donovan's just kind of a little milquetoast. He's a little too buttoned up. Gets a good death. And he's Julian Glover, who is he's in everything. He's in Empire Strikes Back. He's been an Imperial officer. He's been an Indiana Jones villain. He's been a James Bond villain. And he's been a villain on Game of Thrones.
Hey!
So, good on you, Julian Glover. That's a four-peat. So good job for you.
Yeah.
Grand Maester Pycelle on Game of Thrones.
Okay. And who is he in Empire?
He's General Veers. He's the commanding the AT-AT on the Battle of Hoth.
Okay.
He had a death scene that was cut where one of the snow speeders like does a kamikaze run into the head of the AT-AT. Right. Do you say AT-AT or AT-AT?
I say AT-AT.
I see AT. It's the Star Wars version of GIF versus GIF, I think.
GIF, yeah. I've never said AT-AT, and I've always thought people who said it sounded silly.
Yeah, so. I say AT because there's AT-ATs and AT-STs.
Right. It's like, what do you call the AT-STs? ATSTs?
Yeah. You know what? The Empire would never say AT-AT. They would say AT-AT Walker, the armored walkers.
Yeah.
Deploy the all-terrain armored transports. From Kenner. Empire Strikes Back's a real good movie, you guys.
That's a real good movie.
It's Temple and Temple of Doom, Empire Strikes Back, and Wrath of Khan are the ones filmmakers always cite when they say their next movie, the sequel's going to be darker.
It's going to be darker and more intense and more.
It's if the first movie they made is good, they say, oh, this is our Empire. If the first movie they made is bad, they say, oh, this is our Wrath of Khan. Like, we're going to do it right this time.
Once I want somebody to come in and be like, you know what, this is going to be our last Crusade, and just leave it at that, and like let the internet figure it out. It's going
to meet his dad. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is the last Crusade of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies.
Guardians of the Galaxy movies.
When Will and I were first starting out, we back-to-back worked in a writer's room for How to Train Your Dragon, where we worked with two writers who were at war with each other over whether The Last Crusade or Temple of Doom was the superior Indiana Jones sequel.
And if you ever wanted to derail a day of work, all you had to do was just set them off on each
it would really, it was like clockwork. You couldn't stop them. All you had to do was say, man, God, that movie's the best. It's almost as good as Raiders. And just imply that it was better than the other one. And they would just go at it. And I kind of had that in my head going into this podcast because, I love Last Crusade. I probably love it more than Temple of Doom, but I was going to be fair and balanced and measured in its pros and cons. But I think ultimately Temple of Doom's flaws are more egregious than Last Crusade's in terms of a movie.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, Last Crusade is really helped by Connery and Harrison Ford's chemistry and having those two together. Just like the movie just like sings when they're together.
Yeah, having those two guys both trying in a movie and having like playing off of each other is really great. Like their relationship is so strong, and it makes this work as the third movie in a trilogy, because if we go by what Jamie Kennedy told us in Scream 3, you got to deal with a little backstory. A little bit of the past coming back. And that's kind of what this movie does. It's, you even learn, like, the motivation of Henry Jones Sr.'s obsession with the Grail. Like, his wife was sick, and she never told him. And, like, there's all these little moments. I watched it with the subtitles this time and kind of picked up on little nuances in dialogue that I hadn't noticed in a long time. Including the Woo guy had a great line in the opening sequence. The guy that goes woo woo constantly. The one who finds the cross of Coronado is like, woo woo. He says, "I'm thinking about raising my dead mama, dig down and put it on her bony finger."
I had the subtitles on too, and I missed that.
I kid you not. I took a picture of the TV. It's Fedora is putting the cross away, and you just hear him say in the background, "Oh, I'm thinking about raising my dead mama, dig down and put it on her bony finger."
Amazing.
Yeah. See,
amazing.
The beauty of a great movie is you can watch it and discover something new every time you watch it, no matter how small.
Oh, boy. But yeah, I mean, Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, they just make the movie, and it almost retroactively makes Temple of Doom not like as fun. you know. And maybe I'm just coming at this just because I saw this was the first Indiana Jones movie I saw. I've seen it the most of all of them. You know, and maybe it is nostalgia talking, but I don't know. It just, this one, I think.
Actually, you know what trilogy I would compare this to the most of movies, not just Nintendo games from the 80s? And it's a franchise we haven't really talked about that much. This is kind of like the Genesis trilogy from Star Trek.
Oh, sure.
Two, 3, and 4. So Star Trek obviously has a Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, but narratively, Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and Star Trek 4 are one contained little trilogy that people sort of refer to as the Genesis trilogy. And this definitely feels like the Raiders of the Wrath of Khan, Temple is Star Trek 3, good, not great, has some failings. Everyone's like, you're not quite sure what they're going for. It's got a lot of dark parts to it. And then Voyage Home and Last Crusade, they're a little broader. They're a little sillier, but there's a very emotionally rewarding ending to it that kind of brings the whole franchise full circle. This is not a trilogy that's serialized in any way. It's not Star Wars. It's not, Scream or The Dark Knight or any of those. It's 3 very self-contained movies, but this definitely feels like the ending of a trilogy or the ending of a series. You could not have a more final sequence than your lead character reconciling with his father and him and his buddies riding off into the sunset, in like the most gorgeous sunset shot that's ever been caught on camera. Like
to the Indiana Jones theme, like it just
to like the most iconic, like a theme that is the most synonymous theme with a single film character there is, besides, I don't know, James Bond.
Yeah.
Is there another that theme makes you think of a single character?
Maybe the Imperial March with Darth Vader, but
I guess, but that makes me think of like TIE fighters.
Right. I mean,
I'm thinking of just
it's
like
more like the whole milieu of Star Wars.
It's Superman, the Superman theme.
Yeah.
John Williams.
Yeah.
This is another like, who the hell are we to try and sell you all on John Williams as a composer? He just turned 90. He's made some of the most iconic music in cinema, but this trilogy does a great job. This is one of those ones where he really is humming on creating new refrains for each film. Like this one has at least 2 new like bits that I think of, and I can think of just this movie. There's sort of the Grail theme, and the Nazis have like a sort of, I would call it the Bavarian Imperial March.
I had forgotten the Grail theme. I hadn't watched this movie in a long time, so watching it now, it was really cool. It was like, oh yeah, the Grail theme. I remember this.
It was really fun to just watch this. I'm sure I've seen in the last few years, I put it on like one day when I was cleaning the apartment or something.
Right.
But it is just like, it's such a joy to sit down and watch a movie again. I didn't have my phone out. I had my little notepad, but I was just kind of watching it. Like, cause I was like, there's not a lot of notes to take. Like, this is just like, I've seen this movie in and out. So only time I had something interesting was when I like wrote down, how much I like the punch and gunshot sound effects in Indiana Jones. Because they're cartoony in like the best possible way.
Yeah,
he's
got those Indiana real Jones punch is awesome. Yeah, it's so
the real
great.
like real meat slammer punch. Just slapping like 2 steaks together.
Yeah. And I mean, and some of the gags are really great. Like what? I don't know. I can't read my own writing, but I was like, good gag with stomping.
Good gag with stomping. If you know what he's talking about, message us on podcast part 3. That's the number 3 on Twitter.
It's when they're in the library and he's smashing the thing and stamping. Stamping. That's what it is.
Yeah, I'd say like the humor. A lot of the humor works in this, and the scenes between him and his dad work. Where it falls flat is like when the characters kind of become like goofy, like Marcus and Sala and Indiana Jones a little. This is to Star Wars, like this is like Han Solo in Return of the Jedi, where he stops being kind of cool and becomes a little goofy. Indiana Jones has to sometimes
be a bit of a doofus.
Feel like a bit of a fuck up compared to his dad, to sort of feel like he's not measuring up to his father.
Yeah, it just, I mean, it all across the board, it just sort of feels like a more polished version of Raiders. Like, you know,
Yeah.
and, because this is, you know, if you think about it, if Raiders is the young man has something to prove as a director, then this is a director at the top of his game, at the height of his powers. He's like a mega producer at this point.
Yeah.
Like
Right before he closes the door on this kind of chapter in his creative journey.
Right. So it doesn't feel, not that it feels, you know, as we say, not that it feels like he's tired or phoning it in, but he just doesn't have as much to prove here, you know.
Yeah, that's the thing. So. This is, if Raiders of the Lost Ark is winning the World Series in 7 games, Last Crusade is one of those ones where they go in and they win it in 4. You know, they just sweep.
Exactly.
You know, it's like there's not. I'm guessing he didn't have a ton of adversity making this movie. Like he was a huge director who had a string of either critical and or financial successes through the 80s.
Yeah, and not to mention, you know, the shit he was producing at this time too. Like,
that's true.
You know, and you've got the Back to the Future movie and Gremlins. Like, it's
all of like Joe Dante's stuff and Zemeckis' stuff. He was about to start producing like some of the best animated TV of the 90s right after this. You know,
I mean,
like, again, it's Spielberg. I think there's something interesting like about actually looking at his career and spending a little time with it, because he's not. No one in film school was having us watch Spielberg. We didn't go to, you know, we didn't go to USC. We went to artsy fartsy film school. So God forbid you try to cite Spielberg as a filmmaker there.
Yeah, right.
But it's interesting. He's one of those directors who has become larger than life, like Hitchcock or Kubrick or someone like that, where the director as a personality is now independent from whatever films he made.
Yeah, his career is really fascinating. And when he tries to pivot, and when the pivots work, and when the pivots don't, and when he tries to pivot back, and why he's trying to pivot back, and it's and it helps that he is such a good filmmaker. Like, he understands cinema like down to his bone marrow. That like all of his movies are just so like fascinating to watch. Even the ones that aren't that good are just so fascinating to watch, just on a technical level.
Like, you could really argue that a lot of his films that aren't as good, like Ready Player One, that's one of the ones where it's a Spielberg type movie that should have been done by a different director. Right. And it's when Spielberg pivots away from a Spielberg movie now that he's the, like, who would have, if you would have said they're making a West Side Story remake and it's Spielberg doing it, that doesn't sound right in my head. But no. I mean, full disclosure, I haven't seen it yet, but by all accounts, it feels like a relevant movie. It feels like it justifies its existence and is a compelling film in its own right.
Yeah, I've seen parts of it. I haven't seen all of it, but it's pretty amazing. At least what I've seen. So,
well, that's great. You know, that's the thing. I want, and I've said this before, I want when I go see a movie, I want to be surprised. I want it to be good. I'm always rooting for a filmmaker to find the best version of the film that they're trying to make. You know, and Spielberg is, we as appreciators of film, as makers of art in a certain generation, owe a debt to him. The kind of things you and I make, we wouldn't be making if it weren't for Steven Spielberg.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, you know, you look at, I mean, not to mention everything else he's done, but you look at Raiders, and I think you can easily trace a direct line from that to the MCU. Like, no
without
question,
a doubt.
Almost all the MCU movies are basically in tone Raiders. They're basically Raiders and Star Wars. Like, that's you know. But.
And Raiders, you know, people always give Spielberg crap for like, oh, he created the mindless blockbuster when he made Jaws. Raiders is the big action blockbuster. People that complain about Jaws being a mindless blockbuster have not seen the movie. It's a movie about 3 guys on a boat talking to each other.
Or they only remember the big shark moments. They don't remember, you know, what the movie actually is.
Yeah. The biggest special effect in Jaws is Robert Shaw.
Jaws is a good movie.
I can't wait to talk about Jaws 3D so we can talk about Jaws.
Oh, man. Well, I don't know, Sam. We've been talking about Last Crusade for about an hour now. What do you think? So, any last thoughts on Last Crusade?
I think I chose wisely.
I was gonna say that. Yes, yes, absolutely. And especially coming after the run of Batman Forever and Dark Knight Rises, this was such a breath of fresh air.
We did not watch the funnest Batman movies out there.
No.
But this movie is so much fun, and whether you're nostalgic for, whether you grew up with it or not, it's a joy to watch. It's a wonderful action movie. It's arguably the greatest blockbuster filmmaker at the top of his game. It's just great. It's so good, and it went down so smooth. Yeah. And it is a worthy third movie. It does it expands the character a bit. It gives him new relationships. It puts him in new places, but it also kind of feels like the nice conclusion to a trilogy. It ties everything up in, like, at least, if not in a narrative bow, in like an emotional bow. You can watch the end of this movie in the same way you watch the end of, like, Return of the Jedi and think, okay, I've concluded a saga.
We're done. Yeah, no, I agree. It feels like a finale, even if, like you said, narratively it's not a finale.
No. I mean,
and obviously it created some spin-off projects like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles and then, some video games and novels.
There's not as much of an expanded universe to this as there is to Star Wars.
No, I think
because it all hinges on one character. I think if they had wanted to keep this going, they would have had to honestly kind of do the unthinkable and recast the part. If they'd come back in 1999 with a new actor, they might have been able to get away with it. If they'd cast a post X-Men Hugh Jackman as Indiana Jones, you'd be fine. Maybe hand it to a new director. Yeah. Hand it to a Sam Raimi or someone like that. Someone who can bring a different energy to it. Create 3 films that kind of stand on their own. The way they have to treat him like James Bond.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the only way that you could keep the franchise really going. And I mean, and I think part of the problem is that Spielberg and Harrison Ford are so linked to the franchise, and Lucas to a certain extent, but really Harrison Ford and Spielberg are so tied to it that I think, the folks at Lucasfilm, when they were putting together Crystal Skull, were just like, we can't separate them. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, there was a time where the character could have stood apart from the actor, but I mean, I think, by virtue of the fact that when you think of Indiana Jones, his face is Harrison Ford's face, and it has been like that for 40 years now. There's really no way to get... I think you have to create a way for him to pass the torch to a new character.
Right.
Not Mutt Williams, but someone else. Perhaps John Cho as an adult short round, whatever his real name is.
You've said that before. I think that's such a fun idea.
Yeah, have him show up in the new one, and at the end he hands it off. Like, he hands off we don't know what Short Round's up to. He could have gone off and been adventuring on his own. He could be his own professor, on the West Coast at Stanford or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd watch The Adventures of Short Round. I'd watch it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally. I mean, let's give him a real name.
Well, right. I mean, The Adventures of Professor...
The Adventures of Nevada Cho.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the new one. James Mangold is, an interesting choice for it.
Yeah.
Logan was fantastic. I don't think I want to see the Logan for Indiana Jones. But,
no, and I think
which would just be called Henry.
I think he's a smart enough filmmaker to not do that, I think.
No, I think he's a grounded filmmaker, too.
Yeah.
If you're going to give me an Indiana Jones that feels like 3:10 to Yuma, I'm there. Absolutely. Yeah. I equate James Mangold, he's like the slightly more dramatic version of a Joe Johnston.
Yeah,
You know,
I think that
like
yeah, that's a really good analogy.
because Joe Johnston makes very, he makes bigger, more, like broader action movies, but they're all very fun and pulpy and kind of have their feet on the ground,
Yeah.
even when they're not 100% successful.
Right. No. Yeah.
What do you think, Will? Worthy threequel?
I think so, and I I absolutely, I think all three movies. I mean, well, Raiders is like untouchable in terms of like how awesome it is, but I think all three movies are worth watching for sure. And I think this is a nice button, and Sean Connery's great, and he and Harrison Ford have just this great chemistry together. And this was just such a joy after the slog of The Dark Knight Rises. It was just so.
Well, speaking of slogs, it's your pick this coming week, Will.
It is my pick,
and you're on blast, my friend. After the last two,
I've got to prove something, at least to you, or at least make it up to you. So we're gonna go back to the horror, which will obviously be in a lot. But let's do A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3: Dream Warriors.
Ooh, I like that.
I remember being a good movie. So.
I think we're gonna be okay. I think you might have figured it out this time. And another character who I would say is inseparable from the actor.
Absolutely.
If I can't picture anyone else as Indiana Jones, I can't picture anyone else as Freddy Krueger than Robert Englund, and they've tried with a good actor, but there's only one Freddy.
Yeah. So this should be fun. Patricia Arquette, Lawrence Fishburne, and I don't remember who else is in that. I mean, Dean Stockwell shows up, doesn't he? Or
does he?
Not John Saxon. I don't know.
John Saxon.
Yeah, I don't know why I said Dean Stockwell.
Look, there is a world in the 70s and 80s where someone was casting a part, and they probably had headshots of Dean Stockwell and John Saxon and Robert Forster on their wall, and it could have been any one of them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, forgive me for that brain fart. My son woke me up at 3:45 this morning, so it's been a long day.
I'm not going to give you shit for not remembering John Saxon's in Dream Warriors. Well, we've got a whole episode we can talk about him there. If you'd forgotten he was in Enter the Dragon, I'd be angrier.
Yeah, well, or if
as Johnny Cage.
Anyway, as Johnny Cage.
Johnny Cage. Bruce Lee is Liu Kang. John Saxon is Johnny Cage, and Jim Kelly is Sonya Blade?
I guess. Yeah, I think that tracks.
Enter the Dragon, from the director of Gymkata.
Which is Enter the Dragon, but with gymnastics.
Oh, Gymkata.
Gymkata is it's a movie.
Oh, no, Will. It's glorious. Gymkata is absolutely glorious. No. I have never seen a less organic use of a pommel horse in an action sequence.
Oh, what a weird movie. Too bad there's not a third one of those. We can't talk about
I don't think there's a second one of those. I think they said all they needed to say with the first Gymkata. Why dilute the brand? Well, on that note, until next week when we're watching Dream Warriors, thank you all for listening. Thank you for tuning in. You can find us on Twitter at Podcast Part 3. That's the number 3. And as always, he is Will Morey.
That's right.
And I am Sam Charrington. And thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
Hooray!
Hooray! It didn't hurt.